Baal is one of the most mentioned false gods in the Bible, and understanding who he was and what he represented sheds light on some of the major conflicts between the Israelites and the surrounding nations. Baal was not just a single deity, but rather a title meaning lord or master. He was worshipped by many ancient Near Eastern cultures, particularly by the Canaanites and Phoenicians. Baal was considered a god of fertility, rain, and storms, and his followers believed that he was responsible for the growth of crops and the success of livestock. The worship of Baal was a serious issue for the Israelites because it directly opposed the worship of the one true God, the Lord. The Bible recounts numerous instances where the Israelites were seduced into worshiping Baal, leading them away from God's commandments. This idol worship was especially prevalent during the period of the Judges and the reigns of certain kings, such as Ahab, who, influenced by his wife Jezebel, promoted Baal worship on a grand scale in Israel. Baal worship involved several practices that were detestable to the Lord. Sacrifices, including human sacrifices, were offered to Baal in hopes of gaining his favor. One of the most abominable practices associated with Baal was the sacrifice of children. The Bible describes how parents would pass their children through the fire, a horrifying ritual aimed at appeasing Baal. Additionally, rituals often involved acts of immorality, as Baal was believed to be a fertility god. These practices were not only against God's laws, but also corruptive to the moral fabric of society. The conflict between the worship of Baal and the worship of the Lord is vividly depicted in the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. In a dramatic showdown, Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to call upon their God to send fire from heaven to consume their offering. Despite their frantic efforts, Baal did not respond. Elijah then prayed to the Lord, and fire immediately fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, the altar, and even the water around it. This event demonstrated to the people that the Lord is the true God, while Baal was powerless. The worship of Baal was not limited to one location. It was widespread across the regions that came into contact with the Canaanites and Phoenicians. Baal had different names and forms depending on the locality. For example, Baal-zebub was worshipped in Ekron, and his name later evolved into Beelzebub, which is associated with a demonic figure in the New Testament. The pervasiveness of Baal worship made it a constant threat to the Israelites' faithfulness to God. The Bible presents Baal as a false god, one that led people astray from worshiping the Lord. The reason Baal worship was so tempting for the Israelites lies in its promise of immediate, tangible benefits like rain, fertility, and prosperity. In times of drought or famine, the Israelites sometimes turned to Baal, thinking they could gain these benefits by following the practices of their neighbors. However, this reliance on Baal only brought destruction, as it was an outright rejection of God's provision and sovereignty. The Lord's response to Baal worship was always one of judgment and correction. The prophets repeatedly warned the people of the consequences of turning to Baal, urging them to return to the Lord. When the Israelites persisted in Baal worship, God allowed their enemies to overpower them, leading to their suffering and eventually repentance. In summary, Baal was a widely worshipped false god in ancient times, particularly among the Canaanites and Phoenicians. His worship involved detestable practices like child sacrifice and immorality. The Bible records numerous instances where the Israelites fell into Baal worship, leading to God's judgment. The showdown on Mount Carmel is one of the most striking examples of God's power over Baal, demonstrating that the Lord alone is worthy of worship.